everybody. I hope we're doing well today. Today we're going to talk about the classifying of living things. So we just finished our unit on evolution. We talked about Charles Darwin, and we talked about his voyage on the ship called the Beagle to the Galapagos Islands, and we talked about the evolution of the peppered moth. So now we're going to talk about how to classify these living things that evolve. So we're going to talk about the history of how things were classified. So around 350 BC, a long time ago, a man named Aristotle, you may have heard of him before, he classified living things based on if they had red blood or not. So if they had red blood, he would call them animals. And he broke these into three different categories. There were animals that were air dwellers, like birds. There were animals that were land dwellers, like giraffes. And there were animals that were water dwellers, like whales. And that's how he classified animals. And then organisms that did not have red blood were plants. And those plants that had soft stems were herbs. The ones that had several woody stems were shrubs. And one woody stem was called trees. So that's how they classified things a long time ago. But then it got a little bit better. So Carl Linnaeus comes around about the 1700s, and he starts classifying things based on similar structures. Now, he again still has a two-kingdom classification, animalia or animal, and plantae, like plants. But he starts classifying this based on structures, like animals walk and they eat to get their food, and plants stay in one place and they do photosynthesis to get energy. So it's no longer classified based on it has red blood or not. Now Carl Linnaeus is talking about these similar structures and grouping these living things together. Then in 1969, Robert H. Whittaker comes into the picture, and he now expands it from 2 categories to 5 categories. So we have 5 kingdoms, and we're going to talk about what a kingdom is later. But we have protists, monarans, fungi, plants, and animals. And today, the classification of living things is still changing. We're still learning about them. So this is still changing every single day. So the current system is called systematics. And this system classifies organisms based on their cell type. Remember, we talked about prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. Remember, eukaryotic cells has a membrane-bound organelles and it has a nucleus. Prokaryotes do not have a nucleus and they don't have membrane-bound organelles. Remember, we are eukaryotes. It's based on a habitat where they live. It's based on the way it gets food and energy. Animals eat things to get their energy. We know that plants perform photosynthesis to get their energy. And it also looks at DNA structure, and I know that you know a lot about DNA. So this is how animals are classified today. It starts with something called the domain, and this is a very, very broad category. It includes a lot of different animals. And then it goes down to kingdoms, and then phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. So as it goes from domain to species, it gets more and more specific. So let me show you what I mean. So we start at domain and we go to species. And you can see when we're starting at domain, there are a lot of different living things here. And as we go down to kingdom and phylum and subphylum and class and order and family and genus and species, there's less and less animals because it's becoming more and more specific. So think of it this way. Think of it, imagine you have a continent, right? The continent of North America. And you have a lot of people on that continent, right? But if you narrow it down to a country, now you're only talking about the United States. There are still a lot of people, but you're being a little bit more specific. So there's going to be less people. And then imagine you take the state of Pennsylvania out of the United States. There's still going to be a lot of people, but you're being more specific. So instead of saying an American, you're talking about a Pennsylvanian. So you're talking about a less people. And then to get even more specific, you might even talk about the county in Pennsylvania. So you might just take out Lehigh County, and you're going to be even more specific. So just like domain to species gets more specific, continent to Lehigh County gets more specific. So I am not going to make you memorize these, but if you like to memorize things, here's a good mnemonic to help you remember how it's classified. So you go from domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So if you think dumb King Philip came over from Great Spain, if you are into memorizing, that might be a good way to help you memorize it. So we're going to talk about the different domains and the different kingdoms in the classification system that we have right now. So the domains, you can see them on the bottom. We have bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. And if you look at the top, these 3 domains lead into 6 different kingdoms. So in the domain bacteria, there's only one kingdom called bacteria. And in the domain archaea, there's only one kingdom called archaea. But the domain eukarya, which is what we fall into, it has a lot more kingdoms. It has protists, plants, fungi, and animals. And if you're wondering, we belong here in animals. That's where we are. So let's take a look at some specific classifications of animals. So let's take the gray wolf. Domain is eukarya. The kingdom is Animalia. It's an animal. Phylum is Chordata. So that phylum means that they are a chordate or they have a backbone. They're a vertebrate. They have a backbone. And their class is Mammalia, or they are mammals. Now, fun fact, they share the same domain, kingdom, phylum, and class as we do. We have this same domain, kingdom, phylum, and class. So we have a lot of things in common with the wolf. But once we get more specific to the order and family and genus and species, that's when the wolf starts becoming a lot more different than us. Because as we know, we don't look a lot like wolves. And let's take the cat. So the cat is domain eukarya, kingdom Animalia, phylum Chordata. Remember, that means they're chordate, they're a vertebrate, they have a backbone, and class Mammalia. Again, look at this. Cats, humans, and wolves all belong to the same domain, kingdom, phylum, and class. But this is where we differ from cats. Their order is Carnivora, family is Felidae, genus is Felis, and species is Catus. So now we're going to talk about something called binomial nomenclature. And this gives each organism a 2-word scientific name. So if you've ever heard of someone saying, oh, what's the scientific name for that animal? Or what's the scientific name for that plant? This is what it's talking about. It's talking about binomial nomenclature. So nomenclature is talking about a name, and binomial means 2 names. So a scientific name has 2 names. It has the genus that it's in and the species that it's in. So let's take a look at people. Our genus is Homo, and our species is Sapiens. So the scientific name for humans is Homo sapiens. And let's look at a cat. The genus for cat is Felis, and the species is Catus. So the scientific name for a cat is Felis catus. For the gray wolf that we talked about, the genus is Canis, and the species is Lupus. So we know that the scientific name for wolves are Canis lupus.
Here's what I found.
So, a dichotomous key is a tool created by scientists to help identify living things. So I'm going to go through a dichotomous key, but this is kind of a silly one because we're going to talk about how to identify potato chips with a dichotomous key. So let's start at the beginning. That seems like a pretty good place to start, right? So I just got this potato chips from the store. This is what they look like in the packaging. This is what they look like out. So I'm going to see if I can identify what type of chips they are using this dichotomous key. So I'm going to start at number 1. There's 2 options for number 1. Does it have plastic bag packaging or does it have hard tube packaging? So I'm going to take a look. It has plastic packaging, right? So that tells me that I'm going to stay in this column because it has plastic bag packaging. And this does not have hard tube packaging. So everything here is out of the question. So we're going to be over here. So then I'm going to go down to number 2, and there's 2 options for number 2, and I'm going to read through them. Do the chips have a ridged surface, or do chips have a non-ridged surface? So I'm going to take a look here, and they do have a ridged surface. So for 2A, chips have a ridged surface, go to number 3. So I'm going to hop to number 3 now. Now I have 2 options that I'm at number 3. Chips have an orange color, or chips have a tan color. So I'm going to take a look over here, and I think they look a little bit more orange than tan. So since the chips have an orange color, I can identify them as Ruffles barbecue chips. So that's how scientists would use a dichotomous key, except scientists would use it to identify a living thing instead of a chip. But if you're into chips, maybe you're into this. So let me give you an example of a dichotomous key. So for example, if you have any vertebrate and you want to identify what type of animal it is. So remember, vertebrates are things with backbones. You are a vertebrate. So this is another way. A dichotomous key can be in pictures. So I'm going to show you. So you have a vertebrate. You're just going to go along down this line. Does it have fur? Yes or no? If it does, it's a mammal. If it doesn't, it leads you to another question. Does it have feathers? If you say yes, it's a bird. If you say no, it leads you to another question. Does it have dry skin? So if you say yes, then it's a reptile. No, it leads you to another question. Does it have scales? If you say yes, it's a fish, or no, it's an amphibian. Dichotomous key is one that you are going to see in your next assignment. So I want to go over it with you. So use the dichotomous key shown below to identify the animal shown in the picture above, except it's not above, it's below. So right here. So we are going to start at number 1, and you have 2 different options, and these different options, what you choose depends on where you go next. So is the tail length about half of the leg length or shorter? Or the tail length is similar to or longer than leg length? So I'm going to take a look at the tail here and take a look at the leg. So I'm going to say that the tail length is similar to the leg length. So I'm going to pick 1B. So since I picked 1B, I'm going to move all the way to the right and see what the directions tell me to do. So it says go to number 3. So we're going to skip over number 2 and go right to number 3. So I have 2 options in number 3. Fur is fairly uniform in color, usually tan, and lacks spots, or tan to reddish brown coat with black spots. So let me take a look, and it looks like the fur is the same color the whole way through mostly, and it's tan. So I'm going to pick 3A. Fur is fairly uniform in color, usually tan, and nope, there's no spots, so it lacks spots. I'm going to move all the way to the right, and that tells me that it's a mountain lion. So when I look at my multiple choice, I would click B for mountain lion. So thank you for joining me for this trip through classification. And I hope that you learned something new. And if you have any questions, you can always email me, and you can always Schoology message me.